Hello, friends, and welcome to Miss Sheila's famous Funtime stories. Can you figure out who we're going to be talking about tonight? In case you don't know, he's here to give you a hint, and it's Pete the cat. And there he is. And here's Miss Sheila. I really am here. Just wanted you to see Pete. Here he is. He's going to sit with me while I read you the stories. So my first book I'm going to read is Pete the Cat, I Love My White Shoes. And this is my favorite Pete the Cat, probably because it's the first one I ever read. My granddaughter read it to me. I didn't know Pete the Cat until she read it to me. And then I just fell in love with Pete. He's one of my favorite characters. And this is written by Eric Litwin, and the illustrations are done by James Dean. Pete the cat was walking down the street in his brand new white shoes. Pete loved his white shoes so much that he sang this song. I love my white shoes, I love my white shoes, I love my white shoes. Oh no, Pete stepped in a pile of strawberries. In what color did it turn his shoes? Red. Did Pete cry? Goodness, no. He kept walking along and singing his song. And he says, everything is cool. I love my red shoes, I love my red shoes, I love my red shoes. Oh no, Pete stepped in a large pile of blueberries. And what color did it turn his shoes? Blue. Did Pete cry? Goodness, no. He kept walking along and singing his song. And he's saying, awesome. I love my blue shoes. I love my blue shoes. I love my blue shoes. Oh no. Pete stepped in a large puddle of mud. What color did it turn his shoes? Brown. Brown shoes. Did Pete cry? Goodness, no. He kept walking along and singing his song, saying groovy. I love my brown shoes. I love my brown shoes. I love my brown shoes. Oh no, Pete stepped in a bucket of water. And all the brown and all the blue and all the red were washed away. What color were his shoes again? White, but now they were wet. Did Pete cry? Goodness, no. He kept walking along and singing his song, and he says, rock and roll. I love my wet shoes. I love my wet shoes. I love my wet shoes. And the moral of Pete's story is, no matter what you step in, keep walking along and singing your song. Can you see he's got the different color shoes on? Because it's all good. The end. So I just love Pete because he can always find the good in everything. And he says, you just keep walking along and singing your song and don't get upset over things. Now, the next one I have is on the felt board. And so what I'm going to do, though, is I have Eric Litwin actually who's going to recite it. Well, read it for me. So I just have to get up a minute, get my phone because I have it on my phone. That's my speaker.
Bluetooth mode.
To hear it. Okay.
Pete the cat put on his favorite shirt with 4 big, colorful, round, groovy buttons. He loved his buttons so much, he sang this song.
My buttons, my 4 groovy buttons. My buttons, my 4 groovy buttons.
Oh no! One of the buttons popped off and rolled away. How many buttons are left?
3!
4 minus 1 equals 3. Did Pete cry?
Goodness, no!
Buttons come and buttons go. He kept on singing his song.
My buttons, my 3 groovy buttons. My buttons, my 3 groovy buttons. My buttons.
Oh no! Another button popped off and rolled away. How many buttons are left?
2!
3 minus 1 equals 2. Did Pete cry?
Goodness, no!
Buttons come and buttons go. He kept on singing his song.
My buttons, my 2 groovy buttons. My buttons, my 2 groovy buttons.
Oh no! Another button popped off and rolled away. How many buttons are left?
1!
2 minus 1 equals 1. Did Pete cry?
Goodness, no!
Buttons come and buttons go. He kept on singing his song.
My button, my 1 groovy button. My button, my 1 groovy button.
Oh no! The last button popped off and rolled away. How many buttons are left?
0!
1 minus 1 equals 0. Did Pete cry?
Goodness, no!
Buttons come and buttons go. Pete looked down at his buttonless shirt, and what do you think he saw? His belly button!
His belly button.
And he kept on singing his song.
My button, still have my belly button. My button, still have my belly button. My button, still have my belly button.
I guess it simply goes to show that stuff will come and stuff will go. But do we cry? Goodness, no.
We keep
on singing.
So thank you, Mr. Litwin, for reading that for me. That's really neat to have the author read the story for you. And Pete is just so much fun. So I have a few more. I think I have one more I'm going to read with you. This is Pete the Cat and the Bedtime Blues. And this one is by Kimberly and James Dean. The first two were by Eric Litwin. and James Dean used to do the pictures, but then just James wrote the stories and did the pictures. So this one is by James and Kimberly. Pete and the gang had a great day. They'd been at the beach, surf and sun, and tons of fun. Who likes the beach? I do. But when the sun went down, they didn't want the fun to end. And then Pete had an idea. Hey, how about a sleepover? More time for tons of fun. They say, groovy, Pete's place, let's go. The party was far out, but they knew they couldn't stay up all night. The gang decided it was time to say good night. On went the pajamas and out went the light. Good night, Gus. Good night, Alligator. Good night, Toad. Good night, Pete. Pete was just about to catch some Z's when clap, clap, clap. Who did that? Pete asked. It was me, said Grumpy Toad. I don't want to go to bed. I want to clap instead. Pete covered his head. This cool cat needs to go to bed. Good night, Gus. Good night, Alligator. Good night, Toad. Good night, Pete. Time to sleep. Munch, munch, munch. Pete had a hunch. It was Alligator. He was always up for eating. What could Pete do? All the clapping, rat-a-tat-tapping, and munching was giving him the bedtime blues. And Pete had a groovy idea. He got out his favorite bedtime story and started to read, first to himself and then to the gang. Pete noticed it was finally quiet. No more clapping, no more rat-a-tat-tatting, and no more munching. They all settled down. No one made a sound. Pete yawned and turned off the light. Good night, sleep tight, time to catch some Z's. Tomorrow was another day for surfing, sun, and tons of fun. And that's the end. And you know, I just can't stop reading Pete the Cat. I love Pete the Cat so much. So Pete, come up here and talk to me. Do you think I should read another story? Pete says, groovy. Yeah, go. So I'm gonna read this one called Pete the Cat Crayons Rock. And it's also by Kimberly and James Dean. Pete loves his big box of groovy crayons. He loves to draw things like cars, trucks, flowers, and trees. But most of all, the big blue sea. From rockin' red to cool cat blue, with a box of crayons, there's nothing Pete can't do. One day, Pete decided to draw something new. His friends. Using lots of colors is so much fun. Pete wanted to use every one. He scribbled and drew a great big smile. His drawings were groovy and rockin' with style. Crayons rock. Pete was proud of the pictures he drew. He hoped his friends would dig them too. Pete showed Grumpy Toad first. Grumpy Toad said, "This doesn't look right." These colors are way too bright. Pete thought, hey, that's no sweat. That's all right. The next one will be dynamite. That says for Gus from Pete. Pete showed Gus his picture too. And Gus asked, who is this supposed to be? It doesn't really look like me. Pete thought, hey, no sweat, that's all right. The next one will be just right. That says for Callie from Pete. And Pete finally showed Callie her picture. Callie said, this one is fine, but it feels like something's missing from mine. Pete said, what a mess. Bummer, I guess my drawings aren't the best. Pete started to frown. He put his crayons down. In art class, teacher asked, Pete, what are you going to make? I don't know, I'm afraid of making a mistake. Pete looked around. Gus drew the coolest superheroes. Callie's flowers were awesome, out of sight. Grumpy's motorcycle was just right. Pete's heart sank. His paper was blank. The gang looked at Pete and said, no sweat, it's all right. It doesn't have to be just right. Your art is cool because it's you. Your art is so unique. Grab your groovy box of crayons. Show us your technique. The teacher agreed. Art should be fun. Art is for everyone. From Rockin' Red to Cool Cat Blue with a box of crayons, there's nothing you can't do. Pete smiled. There are no rules. It's no big deal. Art is about how it makes you feel. Pete loved his cool art. That's the one thing Pete knew. Suddenly, Pete knew exactly what to do. He tried again. Instead of drawing them one by one, Pete drew the whole gang, just having fun. Ooh. Do you hear all the sirens? We have fire engines going by and police cars. I don't know what happened. Wow, way to go, Pete. That's a rockin' masterpiece. Grumpy Toad, Gus, and Callie agreed. Pete's picture was off the charts. See, that's the groovy thing about art. The best art comes from the heart. Crayons rock. The end. Yeah, so in that one, Pete got a little sad, but his friends helped him to see that what was the most important thing is that art is what you want it to be. It's not right or wrong. It just is. So we want to thank Pete for coming. Pete, can you say goodbye to everybody? Bye-bye. Hope to see you in person someday soon. Okay. Everybody have a good few weeks. See you in a few. Bye-bye. That's groovy.